Mr. Tony Bryant. Now, he's pretty amazing. He's the principal of this awesome school, Silverton Primary School. And I had the pleasure of actually going and visiting Tony in his school, and it's just, I blogged about it, but it just doesn't do it justice. It is like, I want to work here, sorry Julie, but it's a fantastic school. But Tony has had a vision, and he's so true to what he believes, and your staff, your students, the buzz that was happening in the school was just real. You couldn't, the kids knew exactly what they were doing, and it was wonderful. And yeah, he's well known, because when we were in Seattle at Microsoft, I just said to one of the ladies, oh, we've got someone who I think is in the Partnerships and Learning, and she said, oh, Sean Tierney. I said, no, the other one, Tony Bryant. And she said, oh, our golden boy. So he's pretty well known over there. And so he's going to speak to us today about establishing a 21st century school. So I'd just like to welcome Tony to the stage, and let's hear it for Tony.
Thanks, Brenda. I think I might stop now, because I think after that, probably anything else I'll do is going to make it worse. But look, thank you for inviting me back over here. I seem to be over here a bit lately. I was over here about 3 weeks ago talking to a group of principals, and I've had a chance when I've been over here over the last few years to go and visit some schools, and there's some amazing schools in South Australia. In fact, there's some amazing schools all over Australia, and one of the fortunate things I've been able to do is to get around Australia a bit recently and have a look at some of the schools. And I've also had a chance to go and see some schools in other parts of the world. And I've got no doubt that the schools in Australia are the best anywhere. And there's some amazing things happening. And I think because we are isolated a little bit, and the culture here is to try and do things better. And I think all our teachers and all our leaders and all our schools are trying different things and all doing things in a different way and trying to make it better for our kids. And I think that's the bottom line. We talk about moral purpose, and I think in Australia, or particularly in our country, that the moral purpose is to give the kids the best education they could possibly have to make them fit for whatever the world is going to be in the future. And I think undoubtedly over here, we don't have the headaches that they have in other parts of the world. We're trying to break their cultures. I'm going to talk about 3 areas today. One is the drivers of change, and there are a number of drivers of change, and you've probably heard and seen them all in the past. Then I'm going to have a look at how some systems have responded to those drivers, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about my particular school. I don't want to talk about my school too much, because I know that every school is different, and you can't recreate someone else's school in your own school, and you can't do it over a short time. I've been fortunate. I've been principal at Silverton now for 20 years, which is almost a half a lifetime, isn't it, for some of you? And 20 years is a long time. And in that 20 years, we've been able to make a number of changes. And those changes have been embedded, but like everything else you try to do, things do move on. And I think we've probably reinvented ourselves probably 3 times. I look back and think that what we did 20 years ago, in some areas I probably couldn't do it. Our school comes from a low socioeconomic area, very highly multicultural. A lot of those baggage things that come with low socioeconomic areas. I've got a number of parents who are in jail, probably some issue, single parent families and all that. In a different environment 20 years ago, I probably couldn't have done what I did in my school. And you've probably got to acknowledge that. I was fortunate enough that parents who sent their children to our school, probably education wasn't a great experience for them when they went to school. They thought school was something they need to send their kids to be babysat so they could pick them up at the end of the day, allow them to go to the pokies during the day and things like that. But and it wasn't a great experience. So I think in my school 20 years ago, I was able to make the changes, but I also recognised that I probably couldn't have made those changes as quickly in some particular more affluent areas. But I think nowadays things have changed, and everybody has a different view on education. And I'm sure you've all got parents who know everything about education because they went to school at some stage, and they're very quick to tell you how what education should be like and all that sort of stuff. I had a parent in the other day, and he was questioning some of the practices we had because they weren't the same as when he went to school. And he was saying, I believe that kids should be sitting in rows and the teacher out the front and the children sitting quietly and absorbing all the knowledge as he had when he went to school. And so I promptly sort of spoke to him and said to him, what sort of trade are you in? And he said, I do toilet floors and I revigorate them. And I said, so if I came into your business and told you how to do it, it's interesting and how true it is, and that's, some nearly 30 years ago. and he was an amazing man, and I think it sort of puts in perspective of what we're trying to do in schools today, which is very important. We talk about creating schools for the 21st century, and really it's a bad term. You know, we're 12 years into it, an eighth of the way through it. And he talks about the 20 major problems in the world that have to be solved in the next 20 years. And they're talking about things like deforestation, climate change, the whaling industry, and all those sort of things, water. And you line that up with Ken Robinson, and Ken Robinson talks about the creative side of things. And John Richard and Ken talk about that this generation is not going to be the generation that's going to solve those problems. They might have the technical skills, but the thing they're lacking is the creativity. And Ken talks about the creativity, how it's missed and it's lacking in one of the things we're doing. And so if you align the skill knowledge and the creativity, it'll be the next generation that will solve some of those world problems. And I think we need to recognise that there are major problems in the world that have got to be solved, and we're not the ones who are going to solve them. So what needs to happen to our system? Do we need to transform it, or do we need to revolutionise it? And there are major drivers. Either our current practices are not working, or not working as well as it could be, or the environment has changed so much that best practice is irrelevant. As leaders, we all have different types of teachers in our school. We have some teachers who are the best teachers in the system in a different era. And we have some teachers who are struggling with making the changes to what is required in education. But we need to recognise that some of those teachers were the best teachers in a different era. What they have is the era has just moved on, so they're always capable of it. You know, it's nibbling around the sides of what's best practice and what's next practice. And it's a real conundrum, isn't it? What is best practice and what's next practice? A lot of applications you apply for innovation is talking about best practice, and really they should be around what's next practice. And next practice is what, you know, our generation or the next generation are going to come up with, rather than just improving what we're doing, but doing something a bit better. So some of the drivers, our students are more complex. We know that. And as parents, you can appreciate that even more. And the students who come to our school now are more complex than what they were ever in the past. There was research done by the Community and Childcare, and I know it was 2009, and suggested that on an average P to 12 student population of 1,000 students, these are some of the findings, and these are some of the drivers why we need to look at what we're doing. You know, 410 chronic illnesses. You know, back to the early days, how many children were taking some sort of medication to what they're taking now? 230 will be overweight or obese. Big articles in the paper recently about, you know, overweight and what we're doing about it. 150 will experience reading difficulties. You know, not sure if this is more or less than in the past, but I think we're probably better at recognising it. 140 will experience mental health diagnosis. You know, we're probably more open and acceptable now, probably no different than it was in the past, but we're aware of it a lot more. 100 will be admitted to hospital. 90 will exhibit behaviour problems, probably my son. And some of you can probably relate to that, some of the kids in the school. 83 will have some form of disability, 43 of which will be severe. So how's our system going to support these people in the future? Another driver is young people have changed. We know they've changed. You know, the development of the digital media has made kids different. Just look at the stats. And so what does this mean for how we sustain 21st century learning? And what are the implications and responsibilities for teachers? And what do we do to bring together and better align curriculum, pedagogy, ICT and assessment to build quality learning and teaching? A little prep child recently who came to us, we had with our iPads at school, we're noticing all these new apps were appearing on the iPads. We have a school account and our teachers can actually go and try apps and download them, and of course they get synced across all the apps, the iPads, and we had this iPad with all these new apps appearing on it. We couldn't work out what was happening, so we sort of went around the children and we changed the password, and a couple of days later we walked into our 5-year-olds, and little 5-year-old walked up to us with the iPad and said, the password's changed. And we said, what have you been doing? He said, well, I worked out what the password is. I go to the app store, you look at all these things, some are free, some you've got to pay for, and he was downloading them. But he was able to have the skill to actually work it out on how to do it. He didn't think there was anything wrong with it, and there probably wasn't, because in his case he was choosing apps that were more appropriate for him. We know no waiting, no delay. You know, these kids, they're instant everything. You know, the digital convergence. The digital media landscape has generated new language, new grammar, new communication, new imagination. You read the children's writing. How many of your children are using text language in their writing? You know, and we as adults and older people are horrified, aren't we? The abbreviations. And yet, if you look back to the Shakespearean days, we don't use the language that was used then. Languages do evolve, and I'm sure that in years to come, the languages that they're using in text will probably become common and acceptable. You know, here are some interesting facts. Parents spend 40% of less time with their children than they did 30 years ago. On average today, teenagers today spend over 40 hours a week interacting with the media. It has this impact on their learning. This participant culture provides low barriers to artistic expression, doesn't it? How do we take advantage of this, and what are our intentions as educators? Kids want to contribute, be producers, They want to participate, and they have so many opportunities now to do so. What's clear, I think, is there a lack of alignment between the digital reality of young people's lives and the schools they attend. And I think we're probably getting better at trying to address that, but we're still a long way behind, I think. We have to help them develop and build self-concept and curiosity and excitement of learning. The US today, some interesting stuff. You balance this up with the knowledge that the ratio of non-completion of school in America is 1 to 3. And the US prisons is 1 to 31. So something's not working. And you look at what's happening up there with the kids. You line that up with things like, but the kids don't have self-esteem problems like they used to. You look back at the articles that were written around self-esteem, in 1962 you wouldn't have read an article. 2011, 478,000 articles around self-esteem. An interesting survey that was done in 1950, 12% of American kids thought they were important, but now in 2006, 80% of them thought they were important. So their attitudes have changed about themselves. Another driver, young people have different attitudes. And this has become quite obvious over the years, hasn't it? Kids today get involved in more issues than ever before. The issues that raise our children's passions are a lot different from the issues that when we were children. If you look at the kids' passions today around economy, equity and discrimination and animal rights, drug and alcohols. Come back to our days and it was around immigration, wars, conscription, those things, wasn't it? Different things. Our economy's changed. Another driver. The GFC's really highlighted our vulnerability, hasn't it? And how many people still working when they thought they may have retired by now? They're working longer. And what are the issues on these young ones in the future? The pressure of housing and jobs and credit cards and all those sort of things. And educationalists, we need to be mindful of the fact that the skills that are easiest to teach and test are also the ones that are easiest to digitise, automate and outsource. And at schools we need to look at how we address the other areas, especially catering for the demand of the new skills that are required for the young ones. Collaboration, teamwork, producers of knowledge, creators. We're not careful, we're really focusing on some of the wrong things. There's some of the great unknowns for our kids, their jobs, their technology, the problems. Forecasting the future is even more difficult than in other times. In the past, there was a path for everyone, wasn't there? School, jobs, families, and jobs for life. Not so much now. So we need to prepare our kids for the unpredictability. So how do systems respond? Interesting. In Australia, out came my school, and my school site become a blame and shame, hasn't it? And everyone goes on and has a look and see how this school down the road's going, and you see how you're going, and you think, my God, our school's not as good as the school down the road, we're going to have to do something about it, and the parents will see it, and you've probably got parents who go on and look at my school site, and so the response is really blame and shame and try and get schools to do something different to improve those results. And then those results are in areas that are probably not as relevant as what they were, as what other areas are. But that's the sort of thing we're looking at. America's interesting. Let me show you this little video. Has anyone seen that movie called Waiting for Superman? Anyone seen the movie Waiting for Superman? So what I've done is have a look at some of this. This is in America. You probably like this.
Good schools. That's what all of us want. But sometimes I wish someone would tell me just what these words mean. It seems that we all have different ideas on the subject, yet each of us feels that he has the very best solution.
I'd like for this country to have a real education president for a change.
I'd like to be the education president.
I don't ever expect to sign my name to any law that is more important than the Education Act of 1965.
Our goal of quality education is on a collision course with the escalating demands for the public dollar.
Since 1971, educational spending in the U.S. has grown from $4,300 to more than $9,000 per student. And that's adjusted for inflation.
Passage of tuition tax credits,
We must address some very real problems.
voluntary school prayer,
It is not just a money problem, but it is a money problem.
and abolishing the Department of Education.
So we've doubled what we spend on each child. But double the money is worth it if we're producing better results. Unfortunately, we're not. Since 1971, reading scores have flatlined, and math is no better.
As yesterday's positive report card shows, children do learn.
The day of record is here.
In January of 2002, after decades of empty lip service and political victory, it seemed for a moment that what had proved impossible might suddenly be possible. Two men, a conservative Republican president and a leader of the liberal wing of the Democratic Party, were ready to put aside their partisan differences for the sake of America's children. America, the world's only remaining superpower, the nation that had put a man on the moon, was finally going to fix education.
And now it's up to you, the local citizens of our great land, to stand up and demand no child, not one single child in America, is left behind.
It was a bold promise, and to make good on that promise, the architects of No Child Left Behind decided to measure every student in the country.
I understand taking tests aren't fun. Too bad. We need to know in America. We need to know whether or not children have got the basic education.
So now it's 8 years later, and we have 4 years left to reach our goal, 100% proficiency in math and reading. In Alabama, only 18% of 8th graders are proficient in math. And next door in Mississippi, it's only 14%. And it's not just southern states. New Jersey, 40%. Connecticut, 35%. New York, 30%. Arizona, 26%. And in California, just 24% of 8th graders are proficient in math. When 8th graders across the country were tested for reading, most scored between 20 and 35% of grade level. The worst scores for reading are in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital.
So this is the state correctional institution in Pittsburgh. It's where a bunch of my buddies are. Rather than getting on with their life, the vast majority of the guys end up here or dead.
68% of inmates in Pennsylvania are high school dropouts. The state spends $33,000 a year on each prisoner, which makes the total cost of the average prison term $132,000. The average private school costs $8,300 a year. So for the same amount, we could have sent a prison inmate to a private school from kindergarten through 12th grade and still had over $24,000 left for college.
It's a very expensive hotel, man. You got to feed them 3 meals a day. You have to provide recreation. You have to provide security. You have to provide medical care. These guys don't pay taxes. They don't work. It's money that goes one way only.
Since the 1970s, U.S. schools have failed to keep pace with the rest of the world. Among 30 developed countries, we rank 25th in math and 21st in science. The top 5% of our students, our very best, rank 23rd out of 29 developed countries. In almost every category, we've fallen behind, except one. The same study looked at math skills and found in these 8 countries, the USA ranked last. But when researchers asked the students how they felt they had done, did I get good marks in mathematics? Kids from the USA ranked number 1 in confidence.
Interesting, isn't it? And yet the same countries probably produce some of the most creative people in the world. You know, you go Bill Gates, Jobs and Lady Gaga and all those sort of people, and yet they become some creative, some people. It's really, really interesting. It's so the real problem, you know, and how we're going to respond to it is different for each country. it comes back to the McKinsey report, talks about, the only way to improve outcomes is to improve instruction and the quality of the teachers and changing the teachers. And that's a lot of things at conferences and coaching and what we're doing in our schools to try and change our teaching practices. It really comes back to your moral purpose, doesn't it? To improve outcomes of all students regardless of location or background. The days of blaming have gone. They're ESL students. They come from poor areas. Their parents are not as focused on the school, or we haven't got the same resources as other schools. We have to have a belief that all students are capable of learning and all students are entitled to a good education. And every child's born with the capacity to become literate, but why don't all children become literate? We come back to our purpose. Every child's entitled to be able to say that they can tick all of those points. I think it's important. I belong here. Very much the relationship stuff. And the role of the teachers change. Get the job I want to use computers to help me learn. How many of your schools could tick every one of those points? And what's stopping you from creating an environment where you can tick those points? It comes back, the collective responsibility is all of us. How we're going to change our schools and what we're going to do to make schooling a lot different. Teachers working collectively and collaboratively. Students will learn better. Having a whole school approach to transforming education. Not just a small section of the school, but the whole school having a vision. Deprivatising teaching. I think the days of closing up your classroom and not letting anyone else see what you're doing because of fear that they might copy you have gone. Teaching and learning, making it public. Technology has really made learning public nowadays. It's out there for everyone to see. The challenge of re-imaging schools has become more important than ever. And the job of leaders to create the environment for others to flourish and so real change can happen. How many leaders in schools say, I have a great vision in my mind, I just have to get it clear first? You need to have a vision of where you want to see education going, and you need to be able to have people work with you. I want to look and see some of the things that we did in our school to do it. I make it clear that, I've only drunk from the fountain of wisdom, and I've only gargled. Everyone's had a bit of trying to do things in a different way. So my school was built in the 70s, and it was built as an open plan school. Some of you can probably remember the open plan school. It really wasn't a social experiment. It was a way of thinking about doing education differently. And in most cases it failed. And the reason it really failed was not because of the concept and the understandings behind it, because the teachers weren't trained how to work in those environments. And so I took over a school that was built in 77 as an open plan school, and 2 years later the carpenters had come in and changed all the learning centres into individual classrooms. I came in 93 and the first thing I did was knock down all the walls, which was almost heretic, isn't it? And suddenly you had teachers seeing each other and watching each other and working together, and we had learning spaces of between 100 and 140 children with 6, 7 or 8 teachers in there, so it was a big change. As I said at the start, in my community I was able to do it. In some more affluent areas of Melbourne, I probably couldn't have done it. I would have got a lot of resistance from parents. And so in this area, they wanted their kids to come to school happy, go home happy, and think they were learning. And I deliberately brought technology into the school in the early 90s, the old JXs and cameras and things like that, to try and make school different and to try and engage the kids in their learning. And so our school is not a high socioeconomic school, it's a low one, we're very multicultural, etc. like that. Interesting, in Victoria they run lots of surveys. They survey kids, they survey the parents, and they survey the staff. The one on the right there is the parent survey, which puts almost all the indicators at about the 98th percentile. It wasn't always like that. In the early days, it was probably down the other end. But the parents have come to accept what you're doing, and the kids are learning, they're coming home happy, and they're doing the interesting things that they want to see happening at school. The interesting one was the staff survey in the middle. In the early days, the staff survey wouldn't have even got a blip on the scale. It was very, very low. But over the years, when they become to understand it and appreciate working in learning centres and not having their own individual space in a learning centre that they call their classroom, they've come to accept it, and the whole perception of their education has changed. Our kids are still fairly critical. They think all schools are a bit like the one we've got, and they have all the stuff. And it's a bit like the more you have, the more you want. And some of our kids get a bit like that. So making change become a bit like a roller coaster ride, as you probably all know. You know, it's like riding the surf, has its ups and downs, but when you're down, you need to reinvigorate yourself. So where do we start? We looked at the change in pedagogical practices. We went from a teacher-centred approach to a student-centred, personalised and collaborative, etc. like that. We began with a concept of changing the whole approach within the school and worked from there. And the big question we asked was, who owns the learning? And can we make the difference from good to great? I think that's important. Who owns the learning? So we looked at some various theorists around the world, and these are some of the theorists. I like the word of George Betts, you know, make the program fit the child, not the child fit the program. How many of us tried to make these children fit a program? We found a program and made them fit it, whether it was right or wrong, we didn't care. We just got made to do it, and sometimes we did more damage, but we didn't work from where the child was. And the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be ignited, getting that passion for learning. Did a lot of professional reading. There's some really good stuff out there around education. There's some good stuff around leadership. And there's some good stuff around teaching and learning. So it wasn't just a whim and a fancy. That's something that I had in the back of my mind. There was a lot of research, and get your teachers to see themselves as researchers is also important. Michelle Salinger writes some good stuff around 21st century learning. Some of you might have read some of hers. And I think there's another one there. Rakesh Nair wrote a good one called 20 Strategies for Education Innovation. And if you want to do something a bit different, that's a really good article, and you can download it. And it comes up with 30 different things that you could do in your school or make you think about. Everything from having no bells. You know, the old days of schools are organised around what suited teachers, not what suited kids. You know, we have bells and timetables. It suits teachers. It doesn't necessarily the children's learning. So we come up with our school beliefs. They're probably similar to what you say. You know, we want to make school a place of learning for both kids and teachers. I think that's important. We looked at what are the skills required for the 21st century. You know, we found, and recently there is 54 different lists out there, and it's probably growing. You've probably seen a mixture of what is considered essential for the 21st century and different skills. Here's some of the ones around. You know, ACARA puts out their list. The Scottish Curriculum for Excellence has put out theirs, and the Partnership for 21st Century Skills has put out theirs. There's a lot of similarities. Some define a bit more. The Australian one is defined literacy and numeracy. You'll notice in the others, literacy and numeracy is included in right through the whole lot. There was research done by Maria Langworthy from ITL, and what they did was they went out and worked with 7 companies, 159 of the most innovative schools around the world. They did classroom visits, and they collected over 30,000 samples of kids' work. And these are the main skills that they found. You might notice literacy and numeracy is not there. That was a given. Literacy and numeracy there, and ICT is on its own because it's embedded in everything. It's interesting that what came out of the study was that children get jobs on their test scores. They lose their jobs on their inability to address some of those other things like their self-regulation, collaboration, teamwork, skill development, things like that. And your bright kids will get scores on their test scores, but they lose them because of those other skills that we haven't worked with our kids with. So we came to a common understanding around the vision, the teaching and learning, and the practice that we're going to have in our school. Elmore talks about teaching as a profession is undergoing a dramatic transformation from isolated working self-contained classrooms to collaborative work around challenging problems of student learning. It's important that the whole school is on the same vision. So we looked at it and said, okay, what are the principles of our 21st century pedagogy we're going to look at? And these are not unique. We talk about personalised learning, which I'll talk about a bit later on, and I'm going to do a session later more in detail about personalised learning. Student-directed, you know, an authentic curriculum, you know, developing a culture of excellence, data-driven. Data is very important. The right sort of data, not data for data's sake. You know, we're creating a safe and secure environment. You know, nature as a school is more important than it's ever been. You know, what's it mean to be global creative age? It's no longer an information age, but children actually getting involved in global issues, and I know that Marg's at school and our school and a number of other schools involved with deep forest action. And there's a site called Taking IT Global. Michael Furdot's created this site where kids from all ages can get involved in real-world issues and world projects and can make a difference. So if any of you got older kids and want to do some leadership stuff, Taking IT Global is a fantastic site, and there's all free stuff and there's great opportunities for the kids. So what we came up with 7 principles in our school. And then under those principles we looked at various practices that support those principles, and then we looked at the strategies. And so everything we do in our school is based around those 7 principles. You know, we know that we talk about community of learners. We talk about kids who come to school from a member of a community. They're a family community, they've got sporting club communities, they've got dancers, they've got their own different communities. School should be another community. So what does it mean to work in a community? It doesn't mean to say that one teacher works with one child all the time. You work with a number of them. So we have 7 principles and we stick to those. And then we look at the practices that we have in our school to support those 7 principles. How many schools here would have a set of principles that they follow through the whole school that are actually written there and on show? Or do you have them in your head? It's an interesting exercise to have. What are the major drivers and principles in your school that you follow? And then we have our practices that support those principles. These things can change. I think this was pretty important too. It's a nice thing about planning is that disaster comes as a complete surprise. So if you don't plan, then you're not ready for any disasters. So looking at that, so one of the first things was open up the classrooms. And so we looked at the learning environment, and you'll see there some of the learning environment, creating an authentic learning environment where children can actually do things. There's a lot of trust in the schools, a lot of technology. You'll see things there like an FM radio station there that broadcasts out into the community 24/7. So children go into the radio and they will go live or they'll pre-record things. So suddenly learning is authentic. So if children are writing something, the purpose is not to give it to the teacher to get a mark for it or to get a smiley face on it, but they'll record it or they'll do it live so the parents in the community can hear them. And what happens is when they record it and they play it back to themselves, they'll listen to it and say, this is a lot of crap, because they think the whole world is listening to them on the radio. We know they're not, but they think they are. So they'll go back and rewrite it. So you really have the technology underneath pushing up the quality of some of the work. The parents love it because they park their cars in the street before school and after school and tune their car radio into 87.5 and can listen to the children going live, creating their music. So it's another form of presentation. You'll notice that the furniture is very flexible, and you'll notice that the environments are not all looking the same. So one of the things I'll talk about later on in another session is that in each of the learning centres, I believe there are 23 modalities for learning that need to occur. And these are the spaces I would expect to see in all the learning centres. They don't all look the same, and if you tried to put these into a single classroom, you wouldn't have room. A lot of these things would be in cupboards. But in a learning space, you can have an area for a kitchen. So every learning space has its own kitchen, because food is very important, and the smell of food is very important in a learning environment. And we talk about, you've got independent study spaces. You've got one-to-one learning with a teacher, so you can have conferencing. And where's that going to happen? An art-based activity, or naturalist learning, so bring the outside in. So we bring a lot of these spaces. So I walked around to all the learning spaces. These are the spaces we talk about and we'd expect to see in the learning centres. Start of the year is very important when you're working in a community to develop relationship building and how the community is going to work. So we do a lot of work around each home group making their own vision statements, their flags, and they get displayed in the school and things like that. So more of the learning spaces. I know whether you call them flexible learning spaces or agile learning spaces, it's really irrelevant. It's the space that allows for you to do a number of things in it. And so there's space there for PCs, because sometimes if you're doing movie making or working in the TV studio, you need high-end computers, and laptops and netbooks are not always suitable for that. Some of the outdoor spaces, there's gardens and there's dry riverbeds, there's ponds, and the children work in those as well. Some other areas, outdoor areas, stage for the children to perform during the day at recess time or lunchtime, more garden areas, undercover areas, change of things. One of the things we put in, you might notice in the top left-hand corner there's a television. And we run TVs in every learning centre with 24/7 news on it, no volume. We have the text coming across in a number of the areas, and the children will do what we will do. We'll walk in there and you'll put your eyes up and have a look at it, and if it's interesting you pause and have a look, if it's not interesting you walk on. But what we're doing is asking the children to interpret what they are seeing. Often they're sitting in front of a television and someone's speaking to them, so they're being told what's happening. But if there's just the images, they have to interpret. And they won't know if it's happening in Australia or South Australia or Victoria or overseas. So the times of the earthquakes in New Zealand, they saw that, they'll make any interpretations. When they read the text, what they pick up is lots of spelling mistakes. And by the end of the day, it's interesting that you can go in and ask the kids what's happening in the world today. They seem to know, because they've done what we've done, is just flick their eyes up. Looking to a little grade 1, a 6-year-old recently, I said to him, "What's happening in the world today, Johnny?" And he said, "The Australian dollar's dropped again." They just pick it up because things they're interested in. Ponds down the bottom we put in there, so science becomes real, and we've got lots of things like probes and microscopes, and suddenly the kids are talking science language, pH, acidity and all those sort of things. Using geocaching down the bottom there. So the kids are doing geocaching. You see little grade 2 kids out talking coordinates, working off the satellites, doing literacy trails and numeracy trails around the school. Some more of the learning centre environments, creating lots of spaces and for kids to move around in. New media is interesting, using it in creative ways, particularly in the context of digital storytelling. We often see or treat ICT and the use of digital and new media as a bunch of activities, not as a learning culture with good measures. We have a television studio in the school, and lots of green screen, which I'll show you some photos shortly. Television, so that another authentic kid thing, so kids make lots of movies, there's lots of green screen work. They send out the TV. There's a sound recording studio so the children create lots of music. Some more spaces. In the courtyard, in the wall, we put a Wii in one wall and a Connect in the other wall, so it's an activity during recess and lunchtime for those kids who find it difficult to engage on the oval and things like that. They're there playing, you put fitness programs on, you have dance programs on them and that sort of stuff, so it's all around learning so the kids will play with that. Lots of resources and that. The art program has lots of music, lots of software they're talking about different things, the music program, using Acid Pro to create lots of music. And the space is down the bottom for an art program, so other digital art as well. It's hard to predict the social consequences of the use of technology, isn't it? And where is the technology where's the intersection between technology and pedagogy? And really, the technology can simply increase our pedagogical practice capacity, and I think that's quite important. But I think we've got to realise, are we really moving forward? Have a look at these two photos. And they're addressing some of the things that we are trying to do with our children. Are they collaborating? Are they self-supervising? Do both have an economic benefit for the community? Are they skilled, independent learners? Are they using modern technology? And we're in its time. So what's the difference? So technology alone doesn't change the ownership of the learning, does it? And I think we're going to be really, really careful about the use of technology become a group of activities or kids actually owning the learning. Here's a good model for level of ICT usage. If you're at the teacher centre in the shallow end, you're swapping traditional practices with ICT, aren't you? Instead of using a chalkboard, they might be using interactive whiteboard and doing exactly the same things. Or using PowerPoint and doing the same thing as writing it up on the blackboard. No different. Really what you're trying to do is get to the children to the creating level, aren't you? Where it's learner-centred and deeper understanding. The learners take control of the learning through the use of ICT, deciding to some extent to what and how they will learn. And somewhere along that continuum, we will all be. And we fluctuate, don't we, at different stages. But we've got to be very careful we're not just using ICT and at the remembering stage, because you're really not doing anything different to what we're doing in the past. Here's a further thing. So, we want to empower the students to learn collaboratively from online resources and then create video to teach each other. Is at the empowering stage. Exchanging, teacher teaches using PowerPoint, students submit essays to teacher using blogs instead of paper. Really no different. Using technology, but the actual change really hasn't happened. If they're writing on paper or writing a blog, same thing. So we've created this media centre, and the media centre's got the television studio, big green screen, a lot of work in there, sound recording studio, your radio station, trusting the kids to go in there without teacher supervision, and you wonder how you can get away with that because you've got duty of care issues. But there's always adults in the area. But often the kids are the ones who understand it more than the teachers, and the teachers can hold back the learning. The FM radio station recording studio again. Children are always fascinated with space, so we've got a planetarium in the school. And the children can actually go in there and it's interactive. And that doesn't cost much. It's a small room, painted black, put up a few posters, put a television up there, download some really good software which is free. Worldwide Telescope. Anyone use Worldwide Telescope? Worldwide Telescope's a free Microsoft product. Absolutely amazing for kids to actually go out and explore the planets. And when you lock into the planets, it then goes to NASA and picks up the photos they have of that particular spot on one of the planets or the moon or whatever it may be. And the kids can create projects on it. Free download. Absolutely amazing bit of interactive software. Worldwide Telescope. Another one, Orbiter. Orbiter is a flight simulator, which is a free one. We bought a cheap flight simulator, which is the Microsoft one. So we've got controls in there so the kids can fly these spaceships around and rockets around. NASA has some fantastic sites. NASA for Kids is a brilliant site for kids. It's really engaging. And so the kids will go in there. There's a projector in there that shines the southern hemisphere onto the ceiling, and you set the date so you can go outside at night and that's what it looks like. We're trying to make it authentic learning, engaging, rather than just research it on a book or research it on the internet and find out, Pluto looks like this. The kids will go out there and make a path to Pluto, things like that. Then they go and teach the little ones how to use it. I think the role of the library's changed. I don't think it's a place where books are only stored anymore, but a place where learning is created. And so we gutted our former library. I had a library that was rows and rows of shelves of books. And so now in the library there's a television that can use, there's Kindles, there's Kobus the kids can take to borrow home, there's tablets, there's a lot of things that kids can use to create their learning. There's different spaces for different ages. There's kids that I don't have a librarian, and that was a deliberate move. I know it's probably going to be heretic for some people, but I think the role of the library and the person in charge of the library has changed drastically. A lot of outdoor learning areas. We talk about nature schools, bringing the outside into the school. So there's chickens and there's sheep and there's ponds and there's rabbits and all that sort of stuff, and the kids look after those, so they learn to manage those things. Again, the weeds in the courtyards and the ponds and different things. Working in flexible learning centres, needs some discussion about the use of the spaces, the teaching practices and hours. You don't have a space that belongs to you. You have a learning centre that belongs to you and the children. And so there's a lot of collaboration and working with each other to plan. Our work is done in workshops. If we run literacy or numeracy, it's in workshops. So if there are 5 home groups and 6 teachers in there, we might bring 3 other teachers in. And so a lot of pre-testing the kids. So finding what the kids' needs are and using some good technology to pre-test kids, and there's some good technology around. And then you can work in workshops for a couple of weeks and you can post-test and that. Ways, not streaming, because we know when streams, they stay there forever. But if you're running a workshop around a specific need for a small group of kids, you'll get some better value. But you need some kids, you also need kids with multi-ability groupings. So we deliberately run 3 days of workshops and then 2 days of mixed ability groupings, depending on what the topic is. Professional learning teams, their planning is purely Their meetings are purely based around teaching and learning, moderating, use of data. No organisational matters. I have an attitude in the school that I have a staff meeting once a term, and there are a lot of organisational things that have to get out to the teachers. And I see it as my responsibility to make sure it's available in a number of places that they can access the information. It's their responsibility to make sure they find it. So we have digital signage, shared calendars and things like that. So some of the expectations to work in these spaces, you work collaboratively with others, you have no particular ownership, you deprivatise, you personalise the learning, which offers an authentic curriculum, strong student voice, trusting the kids. We have critical friends where teachers go and observe each other. We have coaching happening throughout the whole school. We run learning walks and we have mentoring. So the best way to learn is from each other, not necessarily sending people off to courses. I just want to touch on personalised learning a little bit. And I have a view that, it's real. Ideally, every child making progress, they are prouder every day, further empowering them as learners. It's not return to the child-centred theories back in the 70s, and some of us can remember those. It's not a separating pupils to learn on their own, and it's not about abandonment of a curriculum. It's not a licence to let pupils coast at their own preferred pace of learning. Personalised learning is highly structured. There's a great deal of rigour. There's high expectations, a great deal of accountability, extremely challenging, and there's a high level of peer assessment. And if we're actually I reckon we're on the brink of innovation, particularly around the use of technology in the area of personalised learning, and technology that can curate young learners' choices. Use of algorithms to work out what a student is up to give them the next things they need to learn. And as educators, we'll have to be willing to give up some of the power and put it in the hands of the children. I'll touch on this later on, but the two types, there's for the learner and by the learner. For the learner is very teacher-directed, by the learner is very much student choice. Student choice. We'll pick on a bit later on. So some of the areas on our area of personalised learning, I run a play-based learning program for our little ones, very much around students working on own individual projects, working on their own particular projects, with a highly structured around it. The teacher has no input into the project, and you get some amazing things out of it. Here's some work from a couple of 5 and 7-year-olds. Little boy on the right there, he was fascinated with the Titanic, so he researched the Titanic, he drew it, he did the iceberg, he made the Titanic, and some of the comments there on the right. Setting goals and displaying the goals around the school. Kids have a big say in how they're looking. Running digital portfolios through the whole school from prep to 2. So we run student-led conferences at mid-year, and the students talk to their parents about the learning, and we have the conferences before the reports go home. And the reason we do that is so then the conference is purely about the learning, not the assessment. How many of you, when you have your student-led, when you have your conferences with the parents are up trying to defend the child's assessment or say the assessment was incorrect or things like that? If you have it before the report goes home, then the focus is purely on the learning and not the assessment. The radio, or the radio station, there's some of the technical things in the radio station. You can set up a radio station for under $1,000. Pretty simple. If you've got a computer, it's already much easier. The television studio, big green screen, 6 metre by 4 metre green screen, pretty powerful stuff. Kids in there, they can create some amazing work. Some work around deforest action, getting kids in global products. We've got kids who are monitoring land through satellites in Borneo, the trees and the work up there. They're running kids, teaching kids workshops, inviting schools in so the kids run the workshops to all the kids in the area. We want the kids to be the creators. In the arts, working on art, so kids doing works with graphic tablets, robotics, music sort of setup. Lots of things like reality groups where the kids are actually, taking charge of their learning. Some more reality group stuff. Early bird reading before school kids. The older kids bring the little ones come in and read to them. So the little kids come in on a voluntary basis. 60, 70 kids come in before school. The younger ones and read to the older ones. These kids don't normally read at home. So you've got somebody to read to. These are pretty important questions, I reckon. If you're walking around and spoke to some children and asked them these questions, they've got a pretty good handle on their learning. How many times we go around and ask them, tell me what you're doing. Well, that looks lovely. I like that. If you ask them the questions, what are you learning? You know, why is it important to you? How do you know you've learned it? How do you know it's been done with quality? And what do you do after you've learned it? They're going to do a pretty good handle on their learning. I'll flick through some of the others because I'm not going to talk on that. I'll leave that. So building up staff capacity is quite critical. And there are a number of ways we do it. Obviously, we don't send people off to courses very often because I think what happens is they come back with some great ideas in that last 1 or 2 days. We have a lot of people within our staff who are highly skilled. I don't have an ICT teacher in the school, and that's deliberate. I have a person who coaches others. I have literacy and youth coaches, and I have teaching and learning coaches, and everybody's expected to go and observe and follow each other. I like to work in Masano, particularly around these learning walks, where we go in and focus on the positives, not the negatives, and we only look at a teacher for 2 to 3 minutes maximum, because after that, teachers are very good at assessing each other, and anything longer than 3 minutes becomes an assessment, and that's not what you're trying to get out. You're trying to focus on the positives. I think what John Dewey talks about, we don't really learn anything from experience, we only learn from reflecting on our experience, and that's where you need to come into working as a team. And getting towards the end, so there's a couple of continuous improvement. Yeah, you've got to make sure it doesn't go faster than you can run. I think that's pretty critical. Sometimes we try and do too much differently. You know, our journey in my school has been 20 years, but I think we've reinvented ourselves probably 3 times. I like the work that Peter Senge says, you know, you nudge a little here, you inspire a little there, and provide a role model. Whether you as a teacher providing the role model in the school, or you as a leader in the school providing the role model, I think it's extremely critical. And finally, some of you might have read or seen some work with Margaret Lee, and Margaret did some research around change, and she looked at the blue whale and sardines. Anyone seen the video? I'm not going to show the video, but basically the size of a blue whale is huge, you know, and it can take, you know, up to 3 minutes to do a 180-degree turn. If you look at a school of sardines, suddenly they all seem to be swimming in the same direction, and then they all move into a different direction, but they all do it at the same time. And you wonder how a massive sardines like that can actually move. But if you look at it really closely, and if you want to go onto YouTube, there's a nice little video about this one called Committed Sardines. You'll actually see in that school some sardines going off in different directions, causing a lot of angst amongst the school, going off in different directions, rubbing and causing conflict. And when there's a critical mass of these sardines heading in a different direction, suddenly the whole school of sardines moves in that one direction. And we often relate that to a school and say, well, how many people do you need in your school to change direction for the whole school to change? And the interesting thing about this school of sardines was the percentage was 15 to 20% of the sardines moving in a different direction, and the whole school would move. If you think about your school and think 15 to 20% of your people in your school who are making significant changes is a critical mass, and it's enough to actually change the whole school round, which is interesting in itself. And finally, if you're going to make some changes, here are some 12 important suggestions, and I think, you know, obviously have a clear vision for your school, where you want to go. You know, involve the stakeholders in the process. Michael Fulham talks about that. You learn on the job. Don't try and get all the knowledge before you start. You learn as you go, and you refine it, and you get better at it. Yeah, you break it into chunks. Yeah. The big mistake I made, I think, when I made the first change, I started from the older kids and worked backwards. Probably should have started from the younger ones and worked up. And the reason I did it that way is I had the team there that were best prepared to make the changes. And so instead of happening, you know, within 2 or 3 years, it probably took 6 or 7 years to make the big change. So there's some things. And finally, I think there is enjoy the journey, because at the end of the day, you know, you want self-directed learners, you want kids who are engaged in their learning, you want teachers who are happy in their job. That's critical. And teachers who see their role as so different to what they used to do in the past. And I think I might leave it there, because I think you're probably ready for a break, and it's been a long day. So, anyway, thanks, Tina.